So we need to start this whole process with a history lesson. You know, marketing started back in the 1950s in any real meaningful terms. And plenty of people have written extensively about the transition of manufacturing from this idea that we build a product that we think meets somebody's needs, and we sell that product as effectively as possible, to, oh gosh, somebody's going to use that product, let's think about what they need. And it was in the 1950s when these thoughts coalesced into what we now recognize as consumer marketing. And branding and advertising became a way of doing business. And you know what? For a good 40 years, that was the key success factor that was driving all of the consumer goods industry forwards. But things started to change. They started to change in the 1970s, when suddenly retailers started to become more and more important. They became more important because retailers quite rightly realized that if they started to coalesce, if they started to bring together their activities, they could be more efficient in the way that they bought, they could consolidate their businesses, they could invest in systems and technology, they could invest in branding. And as that process happened, retail became much more sophisticated, and it became much more consolidated. And it was in the late 1970s, fortunately most of us were probably still in school or in high school, it was in the late 1970s when retail really started to have an impact on the consumer goods industry. And you know, there were some really smart people working in the consumer goods industry. I presume there's nobody from P&G here today. Anybody from P&G? I don't need the advice. Has anybody ever worked with P&G? Hands up if you have. You have? You have? Just three of us? Wow, okay. One of the things about P&G is they're really smart, aren't they? They like to think through a problem. And they said, hang about, this is really interesting. We've got retailers becoming more sophisticated and becoming more important in our business, and they're getting more and more and more people through their doors. Suddenly, we've got a vehicle where we can communicate more effectively with our potential consumers. And at the same time, their marketing departments were looking at the way that media was going, and were saying, wow, this is getting much more complicated, much more fragmented. It's much harder to get our messages across. So back in the early 80s and the late 80s, the disciplines of trade marketing, and in 1989, when Brian Harris wrote his seminal book on the subject, category management was born. And that was the next step in evolution. We started to think not just about the consumer in the operation, but the retail customer as well. And that has got us through pretty well for the last 20 years. But after 20, 25 years of effort in this field, when we take a bit of time to see where we've got, the actual results that have been delivered, not that great. Let's have a look. I went shopping in the UK recently. You can probably tell I'm from the UK. Has anybody been to the UK? Ever? The non-Brits in the room? Has anybody heard of a company called Asda? All right, has anybody heard of a company called Walmart? Yes, good. Walmart own Asda. Did you know that when I went shopping in Asda, in their biggest store in the southeast of England, 12% of their items were out of stock? After 30 years at the highest level of category management, at the highest level of systems sophistication, at the greatest level of technology that we have available to us, they cannot keep product in stock. Shoppers say that they have a problem shopping half of the time. Let's do a quick straw poll. How many of you been shopping over the weekend? How many of you went shopping at the weekend? Put your hands up if you did. Okay. Keep your hands up. Please don't put them down. I'm going to keep mine up with you. Don't worry. Okay. Those of you who have... Keep your hand up. So it's very good exercise for you. I'm going to keep you... with your hands up for the next half an hour. Of all of you who went shopping at the weekend, how many of you were not able to buy a product that you wanted to buy? How many of you were not able to buy a product that you wanted to buy? Wow. So 25–30% of people who went shopping this weekend could not buy a product that they wanted to buy. Who's in retail? Hands up if you're in retail. Is it the manufacturer's fault? If you're in manufacturing, is it the retailer's fault? Of course it is. You blame each other. But you know what? We've been working on this for 30-odd years, and we still can't get a product in place. We still can't satisfy a shopper. We're still finding shoppers saying this is a boring and dull experience. I don't enjoy it. Something's not working here, certainly in the territory where we've been putting all our effort in. But let's have a look at the manufacturing side. Deloitte in 2007 published a report where they tried to sum up who were the top 250 consumer goods companies around the world. They put all of these companies together, and the top 250 companies turn over $2.9 trillion a year. Massive business. Massive when you consider that that's just the top 250. If Tesco have 4,000 suppliers in the UK, and we know that in Asia there are 15,000 registered consumer goods companies, that 2.9 trillion just scratches the surface. It's an enormous business. But our best year economically of the whole of the last decade, our best year, we managed as an industry a massive growth rate of 7.3%. 7.3%. All of that effort, all of those new products, all of that advertising, all of that investment, all of that know-how delivered for the industry, 7.3% growth. Global GDP growth that year was 5.4%. So we hardly grew as an industry at all. So clearly, we're not getting it right. Clearly, things are not working the way they ought to. Given that we amass this enormous know-how, this massive amount of technology, you'd have thought that we could grow.